There are very few products on earth that people would fight over. Very few brands that become part of family traditions, childhood memories, and national identity. But in the summer of 1985, something happened in America that almost nobody saw coming. Ordinary people began stockpiling soft drinks in their garages. Supermarkets were emptied. Telephone lines were flooded with angry calls. Some people cried. Others wrote letters begging a company to undo what it had done. It sounds unbelievable today, but one of the largest corporations in the world had accidentally started a rebellion against itself. And at the center of it all was a simple question. What happens when a company becomes so successful that it starts believing it can change the very thing people love most about it? For nearly 100 years, Coca-Cola had been more than a drink. It was baseball games on warm summer afternoons. It was Christmas commercials and family dinners. It was road trips, movie theaters, and memories shared across generations. It was one of the few products that almost every American had experienced in some way. It seemed untouchable. Then, in just a few months, that same company made a decision so shocking that it nearly destroyed everything it had spent a century building. The decision wasn't made by reckless people. It wasn't made by inexperienced executives. It wasn't the result of some bizarre accident. In fact, according to the numbers, according to the research, and according to thousands of taste tests, it was supposed to be one of the smartest business decisions in history. Instead, it became one of the most infamous mistakes ever made by a major corporation. How do you nearly bankrupt an American icon without losing a factory, suffering a recession, or facing a dangerous competitor? You changed the recipe. And what happened next became one of the greatest lessons in business, psychology, and human emotion ever recorded. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand why millions of people became furious over a soft drink, we have to go back to an America that looked very different from the one we know today. It is difficult to explain to younger generations just how powerful Coca-Cola once was. By the early 1980s, it wasn't merely a company selling beverages. It was an institution. Soldiers had carried bottles of Coke during wartime. Families served it during holidays. The red and white logo had become one of the most recognizable symbols on the planet. A man we'll call Robert had worked for the company for decades. Every morning, he walked into headquarters believing he was helping protect one of America's greatest brands. To him and thousands of employees like him, Coca-Cola wasn't just a business. It was a responsibility. But inside the executive offices, there was growing concern. For years, another company had been quietly gaining ground. Pepsi. At first, it didn't seem like much of a threat. Coca-Cola had survived wars, economic crashes, and changing generations. Why would another cola be any different? Then the numbers started arriving. Market research reports, sales figures, consumer surveys, and one particular campaign that would send shockwaves through the entire industry. The Pepsi Challenge. In shopping malls across America, people were being asked to taste 2 unmarked cups of cola and choose the one they preferred. Again and again, something unexpected happened. Many people chose Pepsi. Inside Coca-Cola headquarters, executives stared at the results in disbelief. How could this be happening? How could the world's most famous soft drink be losing taste tests? Was America falling out of love with Coca-Cola? Or had the company misunderstood its customers for decades? The pressure began to build. Every quarterly report brought new concerns. Every Pepsi commercial felt like another attack. And the fear inside the company grew stronger. Because once a giant begins to doubt itself, it starts making decisions it would never have considered before. Soon, executives found themselves discussing something that had once been unthinkable. What if the problem wasn't the marketing? What if the problem was the product itself? What if Coca-Cola simply didn't taste good enough anymore? And that question would lead to a secret project, thousands of experiments, and one announcement that would send millions of Americans into complete disbelief. Because in the spring of 1985, Coca-Cola did something that no one thought it would ever dare to do. It decided to replace its legendary secret formula. And for 79 days, one of the greatest companies in history stood on the edge of disaster. The idea sounded outrageous at first. Change Coca-Cola? Change the very recipe that had survived almost a century? For generations of executives, that had been considered almost sacred. The formula was one of the most closely guarded secrets in business history. Only a handful of people knew its complete ingredients, and legends had been built around it. There were stories about the recipe being locked away in a vault. Stories that made the drink seem less like a product and more like a piece of American history. But the fear of losing to Pepsi was becoming impossible to ignore. Inside boardrooms, Robert and his colleagues pored over charts and reports that seemed to tell the same story again and again. The younger generation appeared to prefer sweeter drinks. Pepsi was winning taste tests. Advertisements from its rival were becoming increasingly effective. And every month that passed brought another uncomfortable question. What if Coca-Cola had become old? To the executives, standing still suddenly seemed far riskier than changing. So, quietly and in complete secrecy, the company began one of the most ambitious projects in its history. Thousands of people across America were invited to participate in blind taste tests. One cup contained the original Coca-Cola, another contained Pepsi, and another contained a completely new formula developed by Coca-Cola scientists. The results seemed astonishing. The new formula performed exceptionally well. Again and again, people appeared to prefer it. The numbers looked convincing. The research looked convincing. The experts looked convincing. Everything pointed toward the same conclusion. Coca-Cola had finally created a better drink. Years later, many people would ask the same question. How could one of the most sophisticated companies on earth get it so wrong? The answer is surprisingly simple. People don't only buy products. They buy memories. And numbers have a difficult time measuring memories. At the time, however, nobody inside those meeting rooms saw the danger. To Robert and the other executives, they weren't preparing to destroy an icon. They believed they were saving one. The project became one of the company's most closely protected secrets. Documents were restricted. Discussions were confidential. Employees worked behind closed doors. As the launch date approached, excitement began replacing fear. Executives genuinely believed they were about to make history. And in a way, they were. Just not in the way they expected. Then came April 23, 1985. The room was filled with reporters. Television cameras were ready. Journalists waited as company leaders stepped onto the stage. What they were about to hear would become one of the most shocking announcements in American business history. Coca-Cola announced that it was changing its formula. The original recipe that millions had grown up drinking would no longer be sold. In its place would be a new and improved version. New Coke. At first, the company expected celebration. After all, the research had shown people preferred the new taste. The executives smiled. They spoke confidently. They believed they had solved their problem. But almost immediately, something strange began happening. Consumers weren't excited. They were angry. Very angry. The phone calls started. Then more phone calls. Then thousands more. Letters poured into company headquarters. Some people demanded answers. Others demanded apologies. Some simply begged for the old formula to return. Supermarkets began reporting unusual behavior. Customers bought every remaining bottle of original Coca-Cola they could find. Some filled entire shopping carts. Others drove across state lines looking for stores that still had inventory. For many Americans, it felt as if something deeply familiar had suddenly disappeared. A drink that had been present at birthday parties, family picnics, and holiday gatherings had simply been taken away. The reaction stunned everyone. Robert couldn't understand it. Neither could many of his colleagues. The company had improved the taste. The research had proven it. So why were people furious? The answer slowly became clear. The public wasn't protesting a beverage. They were protecting a memory. To millions of Americans, Coca-Cola wasn't just sugar and flavoring. It represented childhood. It represented tradition. It represented simpler times. And when the company changed the recipe, many people felt as though a small piece of their own history had been changed too. As the days passed, the situation grew worse. Television stations covered the outrage. Newspapers printed angry headlines. Radio programs invited listeners to express their frustration. Consumer groups organized protests. People created organizations dedicated to bringing back the original formula. Some even treated the change as a national tragedy. The backlash was becoming something far bigger than anyone inside Coca-Cola had imagined. And with every passing day, the company was losing control of the story. Then came the moment that terrified executives the most. Sales of New Coke began falling. The very product that was supposed to save the company was becoming one of the biggest public relations disasters in corporate history. And behind the closed doors of Coca-Cola headquarters, Robert and the executives began asking themselves a question they never expected to face. Had they just made the biggest mistake in the company's history? Inside Coca-Cola headquarters, the mood had completely changed. Only weeks earlier, executives had been celebrating what they believed would be one of the greatest product launches in company history. Now, those same executives were staring at reports that grew more alarming by the day. The phone lines never seemed to stop ringing. Thousands of letters had arrived from furious customers. Some were polite. Others were emotional. A few were downright hostile. One man wrote that he had been drinking Coca-Cola for over 50 years and felt as though an old friend had suddenly disappeared. Another customer claimed the company had taken away one of the few traditions that connected 3 generations of his family. There were people who insisted they would never buy another Coca-Cola product again. The company had expected criticism. No company launches a major change without expecting a few unhappy customers. But this was something entirely different. This was outrage. And perhaps most surprising of all, the anger wasn't slowing down. It was growing. Across the country, newspapers began publishing stories about ordinary Americans who were stockpiling the original Coca-Cola in their basements and garages. Some stores limited how many bottles customers could purchase. Others completely sold out. The original Coca-Cola had suddenly become something of a treasure. The irony was impossible to ignore. The company had spent millions of dollars developing a new product because research suggested people preferred its taste. Yet now millions of people were desperately searching for the old product they supposedly liked less. For Robert and the executives, it was becoming increasingly difficult to explain. The numbers had said one thing. The public was saying another. Then came another problem. The media had discovered the story. Every evening, television anchors discussed the growing backlash. Newspapers ran headline after headline. Talk radio hosts invited listeners to vent their frustrations. The entire country seemed to be talking about a soft drink. At one point, Coca-Cola was reportedly receiving thousands of phone calls every single day from angry consumers. Some callers cried. Some pleaded. Others demanded answers. And every call carried the same message. Bring back the original Coke. The pressure inside headquarters became intense. Meetings stretched late into the night. Executives debated every possible solution. Could they wait it out? Would consumers eventually accept the new formula? Would the outrage simply disappear? Some believed it would. After all, people often resist change at first. Perhaps they simply needed more time. But every new report suggested the opposite. The backlash wasn't fading. It was becoming part of American culture. Comedians joked about it. Television programs discussed it. Political commentators even referenced it. The story had become much bigger than New Coke itself. It had become a lesson in what happens when a company misunderstands the emotional connection people have with a brand. For the first time, Robert began wondering if the unthinkable might happen. Could Coca-Cola actually lose its place in American life? It was a frightening thought. This wasn't just another company. This was Coca-Cola, one of the most recognized brands on earth. Yet for 79 days, the company found itself trapped in a crisis entirely of its own making. Then came another alarming realization. Every day the original formula remained unavailable. Consumers seemed to love it even more. People spoke about the old Coke with a level of affection that few executives had ever fully appreciated. Memories came pouring out. Family gatherings, summer vacations, baseball games, first dates, holiday celebrations. The drink had become woven into people's lives in ways no market research report could ever measure. The company had focused on taste. The public had focused on meaning. And there was a huge difference between the two. As the summer of 1985 continued, the pressure reached a breaking point. Inside headquarters, the conversations became more serious. There was now a question hanging over every meeting. Should they admit they were wrong? For a corporation as large and powerful as Coca-Cola, such an admission would be humiliating. Companies rarely reverse decisions so quickly. Companies rarely tell the world they made a mistake. And companies almost never bring back a product they had just declared obsolete. Yet the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. The longer they waited, the more damage they risked causing. Then one day, after weeks of anger, confusion, and mounting pressure, Robert and the executives reached a conclusion they never imagined they would have to make. The original Coca-Cola had to return. The question was no longer whether the company had made a mistake. The question was how they would explain it to millions of people who had spent nearly 3 months demanding exactly this moment. Because in just a few days, Coca-Cola would make another announcement. And this time, the entire country would be watching. On July 11th, 1985, less than 3 months after launching New Coke, Coca-Cola did something almost unheard of in the corporate world. It surrendered. The company called a press conference. Reporters packed the room. Television cameras rolled. And millions of Americans waited to hear what would happen next. For weeks, executives had tried to defend their decision. They had trusted the research. They had trusted the taste tests. They had trusted the numbers. But now, they had no choice but to trust something else. Their customers. As Robert sat with the other executives, there was a sense that this was more than a product announcement. This was a moment that could define the company for decades to come. Then came the words millions had been hoping to hear. The original Coca-Cola formula would return. The room erupted. News spread across the country almost immediately. Some people cheered. Others called family members to share the news. Store owners began preparing for a rush of customers. It was one of the most extraordinary reactions ever seen following a corporate announcement. A soft drink had returned, and people were celebrating as though an old friend had come home. The original formula would return under a new name, Coca-Cola Classic. The company hoped that bringing back the old formula would calm the outrage and begin repairing the damage. But something unexpected happened. The return of Coca-Cola Classic became an event in itself. Television stations covered it. Newspapers printed front-page stories. Customers lined up to buy it. Some stores sold out almost immediately. Many consumers bought multiple cases at once. For the first time in months, Coca-Cola was once again at the center of a national conversation. But this time, the story had changed. The company that had been criticized for taking something away was suddenly being praised for listening to its customers. And as strange as it may sound, the crisis that had nearly damaged Coca-Cola beyond repair was beginning to create an entirely new relationship between the company and its consumers. People no longer took Coca-Cola for granted. They appreciated it more. They valued it more. And they became even more loyal to the brand. The irony was astonishing. By trying to improve its most famous product, Coca-Cola had nearly destroyed an icon. Yet by bringing the original formula back, it had reminded millions of people exactly why they loved it in the first place. Sales of Coca-Cola Classic surged. The company slowly regained its footing. The panic inside headquarters began to fade. But one question remained. How could so many intelligent people have misunderstood their customers so completely? Over the years, experts have studied the New Coke disaster again and again. Some believe it was a lesson about the dangers of relying too heavily on data. Others believe it showed that emotions can be more powerful than statistics. And then there is another theory, a theory that has never completely disappeared. Some people believe the entire episode turned out to be one of the greatest marketing victories in business history. Think about it. For months, Coca-Cola dominated the news. Millions of people discussed the brand. Consumers suddenly remembered how much they loved the original formula. When Coca-Cola Classic returned, people rushed to buy it. The company had accidentally created one of the most successful relaunches ever seen. Was it planned? Most evidence suggests it was not. The executives truly believed New Coke would succeed. The outrage had caught them completely off guard. But whether it was intentional or not, the result was remarkable. The company survived. The brand survived. And Coca-Cola became even stronger. For Robert, the entire experience left a lasting lesson. A business can measure preferences. It can analyze trends. It can collect endless amounts of data. But there are some things that numbers cannot fully explain. Memories, traditions, emotional connections. Those things rarely appear in charts and graphs. Yet they often determine the fate of even the largest companies in the world. The story of New Coke was never really about a soft drink. It was about identity. It was about nostalgia. It was about what happens when a company forgets that its customers are not simply buying a product. They are buying a feeling. They are buying memories of summer afternoons, family dinners, and moments that can never be repeated. And when those memories are threatened, people respond in ways that no market research can predict. Nearly 4 decades later, the New Coke story is still taught in business schools around the world. It remains one of the most famous corporate mistakes ever made. A reminder that even the biggest companies can make enormous miscalculations. A reminder that consumer loyalty is fragile. And perhaps most importantly, a reminder that success can sometimes make companies believe they understand their customers better than they actually do. The company that survived world wars, economic crises, and fierce competition came closer to damaging itself than any rival ever could. All because it changed a recipe. A recipe that millions of people never wanted changed in the first place. And maybe that's the real lesson hidden inside this extraordinary story. Sometimes the things people love are valuable precisely because they remain the same. And when you try to improve a cherished memory, you may discover that it was already perfect. So, if you had been standing in a grocery store in the summer of 1985, would you have tried New Coke? Or would you have joined the millions of Americans demanding the return of the original? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, because the next billion-dollar business mistake is even more unbelievable.